Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Derek McPherson. I'm a Vice President and Mining Analyst at Red Cloud Securities, Inc. Today's presenter is Baselode Energy, a new Canadian uranium explorer focused on the Athabasca Basin. Presenting on behalf of the company is President and CEO of Baselode, James Sykes. The format for today will be as per usual. James will give us an overview on Baselode, talk about the company's unique approach to uranium exploration and why their projects fit the model. And then we'll take your questions live. So please feel free to submit your questions at any time in the chat. So to start with, we'll handle the disclosures and then we'll get into it. So for Baselode Energy, there may be some forward-looking statements made on this webinar. I would direct listeners to the cautionary note on page 2 of Baselode's corporate presentation located on the company's website. For Red Cloud Securities, Inc., I would highlight this webinar is for information purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation to purchase or sell securities or a recommendation to buy or sell securities. And we note that this call does not take into account the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigations and seek their own professional advice before investment. Please see our most recent note on Baselode for the applicable disclosures, and we'll post up that research link shortly. So with that, the exciting part out of the way, I'll turn it over to James to give us an overview on Baselode Energy. James?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Derek, and thank you very much, Red Cloud, and people watching the show. So Baselode Energy, we are a newly formed company. We listed publicly in June of this year. So although we are a new company, we're not new at what we do, and I will get into that. Disclaimer, as what Derek mentioned. So again, Baselode Energy, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is what we want to do going forward. We are targeting high-grade basement-hosted near-surface uranium deposits in the Athabasca basin area, which is home to the high-grade uranium jurisdiction of the world. And our strategy is to look for near-surface deposits because we figure those would be economic in the sense that you wouldn't have to mine too deep or have other issues to deal with. So we are looking at two main properties that we have in our portfolio at the moment within the Athabasca Basin area. And our management team, myself as President and CEO with a technical background to make discoveries, and on our financial side, our Chairman of the Board, Stephen Stewart. Again, we're guys who have the experience in the industry. We know what to do, so it's a perfect marriage of technical expertise and financial prowess. So we're very comfortable in that we are the right team to go forward and make the next big discovery in the Athabasca Basin area. We recently completed a raise in October, so just last month, and we've raised $3 million in that, plus a $500,000 we had going forward. So we now sit comfortably with $3.5 million in cash and a very tight capital structure going forward to get our projects underway. And should we be able to make a success in our inaugural exploration attempts, I feel that this would be a company that would just explode. And just to give you an overview of the corporate share structure, so again, we've been floating around that 35 to 40 cents share structure for quite a while. You can see around the time when our raise was announced, our volume just started to increase exponentially, and that's what we really like to see. We like to see that volume and the active daily trading. So this is very good news for the company. 50% owned by insiders, personal insiders about 5%. Power Ore, which is the company that vended the project and listed us or helped us to list to get public. They've got about 44%, and then the rest are retail and institutional investors. I do like the fact that we do have a lot of retail investors, as a lot of these people I know would be akin to holding on to their shares, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for a very long and we're looking for a lengthy journey to bring all of our shareholders along. Obviously, we want to make a discovery as quick as possible, but we feel that we've got a lot going for us, and it's not just in two properties, but also what we're looking for down the road. So the proven team. This is the Ore group of companies led by our Chairman of the Board, Stephen Stewart. Strong in-house financial and technical expertise, so we're able to pose any questions or just go amongst the different companies to help out with one company where applicable, and we're finding that this is a great approach and it works very well. With the Ore group of companies, we also get access to to insiders and to additional shareholders. So, for example, Mustango and Orfinders, they both have strategic investors through Eric Sprott as of this year. So that is something with Baselode coming on. We can also have, we can get the access to substantial investors down the road. And we've had a four times return since our IPO in June. Big news. That's huge. That's exciting. We're very happy with what we can do with this company and how it's progressing as it has been so far. And our management team and board of directors. So myself, Stephen, Alex Stewart, and so the directors, Michael Mansfield, Gautam, Charles, all people with experience and highly educated in what they do. These guys are professionals on every single level. So again, very strong team of us moving forward. I'm assuming most people watching this are all under the assumption that uranium will take off, that we're going to enter into a uranium bull market. This is what we're all here for. This is, I like to show this graph simply because it really plays out nicely that we are here in this cycle. This is the graph, the uranium spot price from 2000 until 2020. But if you notice that run from about 2003, the tail end of 2003, up to 2007, 2008, that was a spectacular run in which we saw the spot price increase at, between 5 to 10-fold. We're in that situation right now. However, the fundamentals are a million times better now. And this is not just me saying this. These are the professionals in the industry who are saying it. This is Cameco, one of the world's largest uranium miners, who are also saying the same things, that the fundamentals that exist now exceed and are better than what we saw in the 2007 to 2008 uranium run. This is where investors can generate serious potential return. You cannot see this happening in any other commodity in the world. This is unique to uranium, and this is also why uranium is kind of on its own legs. We know the utilities have to come back to the market and start signing long-term contracts. We're hoping that is happening soon, and that will initiate more of a spot price inflection. So the uranium market's here. We're in this prime position for the uranium market to bounce back and return significant shareholder wealth. So why are you in this conversation? Why are you attending this video? Not just to know that the uranium bull market's there, because I think you guys already know that. You want to learn about baseload, and this is what I'm here to tell you. So let's continue on before my internet dies again. Hopefully it won't. The Athabasca Basin, northern Saskatchewan, this is the home to high-grade uranium. It's one of the most prolific uranium mining jurisdictions in the world. We've got favorable laws in place. Saskatchewan is very mining friendly. There's a lot of data that's available, so people can actually look for, where are we going to make the next deposit discovery? And that's one thing that we have been able to use to our advantage to stake the properties that we have. Saskatchewan is it's very pro-uranium, very pro-exploration and pro-mining. So we do have straightforward licensing and approval processes. This is not a jurisdiction that is unfamiliar to uranium or to radiation. So all of those permitting processes are very streamlined and in place. And excellent infrastructure. There are mines up in the area, and there's roads going to a lot of the neck of the woods in there. So this is perfect for an exploration company such as Baselode coming in. The Athabasca area itself is responsible for about 15% of the global uranium production. That's not a small chunk. That's quite substantial. It used to be even higher. Highest grades in the world. There's no other jurisdiction in the world that has comparative grades to what we have. At least 10 to 20 times the average world grade. This is what makes Athabasca so lucrative and necessary for, so lucrative for exploration, and it's prolific. Just looking at some of the prices there, comparing what 1% U3O8 is to grade of gold at those prices. So it's very valuable ore. McArthur River, Cigar Lake, these are the two most valuable mines in the world. Well, mines with commodities in the world. They're high-grade uranium, 20%. There's no other commodity that can touch that on a value state. And basically, the Athabasca, because the high grades are there, that most of these deposits are lower cost operations compared to any of the alternative jurisdictions such as USA and Africa. So a lot of things going for the Athabasca Basin, and a discovery in this area is something that can turn into a mine, not just a discovery, but something that can turn into a mine, can have serious return to shareholders. Looking at our properties, we are exploring outside of the Athabasca Basin, and that's kind of what we're looking at. That's our thesis going forward, is that we don't need that sandstone cover as it is today to make a discovery. We like the idea that the sandstone basin was much larger, did cover these areas at some point, but now we're looking for the same structures and shallower deposits instead of going much deeper into the sandstone, which has notoriously caused a lot of problems for mines moving forward. So when you look at our projects, the Shadow project and the Hook project, both 100% owned by Baselode. We have no option agreements, no royalties. That's very favorable for us. 76,000 hectares in these two properties. So now these are not small properties, these are quite large, but very lucrative in what they have in the way of geophysics and potential geology. So as I mentioned, what we're looking for is this Athabasca 2.0 style of deposit and discovery. The Athabasca 1.0, which is looking for mineralization hosted along the unconformities. We've identified that this can be a serious problem, but if you start looking at a lot of deposit discoveries that are being made today, a lot of them are in the basement. They're fully hosted in the basement. So if you can remove any issue with the sandstone at all and just look at the basement hosted discovery, much easier to deal with in terms of not only drilling efficiency, but also when you get to the stage of mining, they're much easier to mine. So the Athabasca 2.0, and it's a simpler geological situation. You don't have the sandstone, which has proven to have mining engineering difficulties. Both McArthur River and Cigar Lake have flooded at least twice. There's no other underground deposit in the Athabasca sandstone. The reason why? Because that sandstone is an aquifer. We're removing that situation from any type of deposit that we can discover. The rocks are very competent. That's a huge key going forward. This is not brittle sandstone. This is not sandstone that would be flowing or sloughing. This is a pretty competent rock, just like any other deposit in the world, whether it's copper or gold. They're all in these basement type of rocks, and that makes for easy mineability. We're not reinventing the wheel on the mining situation here. We're just exploring for something uniquely different than looking for unconformity hosted deposits. Examples of these basement hosted deposits, as they do exist: Arrow, which I helped discover, Rabbit Lake, Eagle Point, Uranium City. These are all big jurisdictions. Eagle Point system itself, 200 million pounds. Arrow is looking like 300 million pounds and plus. Uranium City over 60 million pounds. These are not small systems. Whereas on the other side, yes, you do get these massive deposits as well at McArthur River, Cigar Lake, Phoenix and Midwest, all high grade, all quite large deposits. So there is that combination of the two. We just feel that exploring for the basement rocks is the proper approach to go. Just a quick little look here at kind of the rationale on the thinking. When you look to the right-hand image where the green is, no sandstone cover, these are all the deposits that have been mined out, with the exception of the Raven Horseshoe deposits, which are a little bit deeper and of lower grade to the south. But the main ones, Rabbit Lake, the Eagle Bay and Collins Lake, they've all been mined out. When you look at when you start to get 0 to 100 meter sandstone cover, even that can be mined out, but that's really pushing the limits. And you get these deposits, Jeb, Caribou, and the Sioux deposits that have all been mined out. But right next door to them, once you start getting over that 100 meter sandstone thickness, it's far more difficult to mine. And this has been tried and proven by the bigger companies such as Orano, Exariva, Kojima, and Chemical. You can't mine, you really can't do an open pit below 100 meters of sandstone cover. You can't even, you can do an underground mine, but you need to have the grade there. You need to have the size and tonnage. You need to have McArthur River, Cigar Lake. These are not easy to find. There's no doubt about it. These are definitely not easy to find. So taking that approach, we want to avoid that sandstone cover 100%. We want to focus on near surface mineralization, something that can be mined. So we're going to follow the same footsteps that we would use to find a sandstone deposit, but looking in the basement. and focusing more on the basement guts, the structure that hosts these deposits. So all of these Athabasca deposits are all structurally controlled. That is the main control. It's not a sandstone controlled. It's not an unconformity controlled. It's not a basement controlled. They're structurally controlled, and the structures are all emanating and coming from the basin. The deeper your structure and the longer lived your structure in these basement rocks, the better chance you have for having fluids moving along such a system like that. And if fluids are moving, which typically carry uranium, if there's uranium in the system, that's the type of system you need to make a discovery. So just looking at some of the logistics, as I mentioned, you can see above the dashed line, that's basically the maximum open pit depth that you can do in the sandstones. Everything else below that have not been mined out except for MacArthur River and Cigar Lake, which are massive tonnage deposits. But if you start looking over on the left-hand side of the image, where you get these long systems, these triple R's, these eagle points, these arrows, these are the next phases of, or the next stage, I guess, of uranium deposits and what can possibly be mined out in the future. I personally believe, and this is why why we're taking this Athabasca 2.0 approach, is that this is what we're looking for. These are the things that can be mined and will be mined. So if we can have something starting near surface within 100 meters of surface, it's game on right there. That's even if you start out with an open pit and go down underground, that's the key. So both of our projects are positioned in the right rocks. We feel that there's quite a lot of potential out in these areas, especially when we're looking at some of the uranium concentrations that currently exist within the basement rocks in these areas. So looking at the shadow property, the Majatic and Virgin River gneisses and schists, these are naturally elevated with uranium as comparatively to the sandstones, or even comparative to the Wollaston rocks to the east of the basin. However, the Wollaston rocks also host over 500 million pounds of uranium in there. So grades, their background grades from the rocks in the area, 3 ppm to 4 ppm, 6 ppm, they can add up some serious tonnage. I'm not going to get into the whole question of, do you need the Athabasca sandstone fluids or uranium within those fluids to help with the deposit? That will be a topic for another day. The Shadow Project, right now, this is our flagship property. We're putting a lot of attention on this, and rightfully so. There's a lot of potential structure on this that I think has been completely overlooked. But what we have recognized is that this is an area that could host these basement hosted deposits that we're looking for, these near surface, high grade basement hosted. So this is one of the largest structural trends observed in northern Saskatchewan. This continues up into the territories. This Virgin River shear zone is a massive shear zone. It's deep rooted, and we've seen that through our geophysics. We recently announced, we had a news release last week in which we showed that these structures, we can follow them for at least a kilometer depth and even deeper. And there are also some key features happening within those structures that are indicative of this being the right type of structural terrain. From a structural viewpoint, we see that this is very similar to Uranium City, Eagle Point, Arrow, even Key Lake. There's a lot of analogies that we can find within the Shadow property that really make it look absolutely exciting for the next big Athabasca discovery. So with the mobile MT survey that we had flown in August, and we've had 2 iterations of results, the latest being that we had some resistivity inversions done that allowed us to see the geophysical package deeper, to interpret the geology deeper, which gives us an idea of the depths that we're kind of looking at, but also looking at some little structural irregularities, I guess. And it's these type of things that I've looked at for any deposit that I worked on, and having the ability to work on deposits in the past has helped me be able to correlate what I see from a geological perspective into a geophysical perspective. And this is the kind of information that we're using and able to see here. What these inversions have done for us is that where we originally thought we just simply had one conductive trend or a structural corridor, we can now see that these are divided into subparallel systems, and that even these systems, they bifurcate, they merge together, and this is where you open up the whole rock system. Because then rocks are hard. You need to break them to allow fluids to move. And by doing that, by breaking all these rocks, and the more fractures you have, you have the possibility for more fluids to migrate through these rocks. Now it's just a matter for us. We've identified the right structural corridors. We believe we've identified the right structural traps that exist on the property. Now we're going to follow up with our work on here by doing a gravity survey, because gravity helps us find these areas of hydrothermal alteration. And that's the next big picture in the puzzle, is if you want to find the fluids, you need to find hydrothermal alteration. Without it, there's probably no chance that you will have a deposit. Structure exists almost everywhere in the basement, in the basin rocks and around the basin area, but you need that right structure. What I really like about shadow, upon many things in shadow anyway, is this whole dilatancy that we see. So we know the Virgin River Shear Zone is this massive structure. And if you look to the north end of the property where we actually have written Virgin River Shear Zone, you can see it's what we've interpreted as a few structures. They migrate, or they merge together, they bifurcate, but it's really in essence one or two little systems. It's not until you see around that Key Lake area in the middle, which I'll just quickly draw on here. So it's not until you see that area right here where this whole system in itself bifurcates. Now, when you get down to the bottom of the system, you've now got 5 individual conductive trends or structural trends. So you've gone from 1, maybe 2 to 5. It's almost like a tree branch, and now you have multiple limbs coming off. This is where structure happens. This is where structure occurs and fluids can accumulate. This is why we really love this area. And there's also a deflection right around where I drew, just north of Key Lake, where the whole system trend just basically deflects a little bit. And even that in itself is very important for a vacuum system and for fluids to migrate to. That's what we're really looking for. We're looking for these structural traps and a corridor that would move uranium for long distances and accumulate them in these traps. So we're moving this project quite along nicely. We are continuing on with consultation with the First Nations and the Métis in the area. Our permits have all been issued. Our permit applications have all been issued to the Ministry of Environment. So it's just basically a waiting game for when everything is okayed and we can get the permits back to start doing work. We've submitted the gravity application on its own simply because it's a low impact type of survey, so we can get that back sooner and start on the gravity work much sooner than we could for the drilling. But we are anticipating permits to come back anywhere between December and early January to get the ball rolling. We are aiming for a drill program. As soon as permits come back, we can start the ball rolling on that. And that should be anywhere between mid to late December or early to mid January. Just looking at another image showing these same conductors. This is now the magnetics in the background. But one of the things that I also look for is how these conductors or structural systems relate to the magnetics. We're looking for these steep vertical gradients, so basically anything from a pink right down to a blue. The steeper the gradient typically indicates the steeper the structure. And this is what we're looking for. We're looking for these very narrow, steep structures that migrate for quite some distance. And we can see these picking up in the areas that we've identified as Key, Arrow, Eagle, Sioux. The Hook project, which is on the east side of the basin, another exciting project for us. It is approximately 60 kilometers east-northeast of the Key Lake Mill, so absolutely within trucking distance. We're actually not too far from McArthur River Mine as well. We're also on geophysical strike of there. But we're in the Wollaston rocks, which are the same rocks that host McArthur River, Cigar Lake, Key Lake, Eagle Point, Phoenix. 500,000 pounds, at least 1 billion pounds of uranium within the Wollaston rocks, and we're right in there. To the south of us is the Hook showing, which has an average of 44.5 weight percent U308. This is a surface showing at the area with the orientation of those veins oriented towards MacArthur River, cutting through our property within the dashed red lines that I've highlighted here. The dashed red lines are really picking up on a geophysical anomaly, which looks like a large dilation zone, and knowing the Hook showings are veins indicates dilation. But what I also want to point out is that if you look at the Athabasca Basin itself, you can see an offset on there that would line up with the Hook Lake, indicating that there's our offset, indicating that there is a potentially significant structure that is coming onto the property, which would coincide with this northwest trending magnetic anomaly. We know that there has been uraniferous boulders discovered on the Hook property. It's just a matter of us being able to get out there, put boots on the ground, and being able to determine the source of these rocks from up ice direction. There's a lot of data on Hook. Hook's been explored for quite a number of years, but it hasn't really been looked at or reinvestigated with much detail in the past 20 to 30 years. So it's quite a big undertaking for us to start going through all of the data and make sure that we haven't missed everything in order to really make the next big discovery out on Hook as well. But staying with that Athabasca 2.0, we're right in the right area, we're in the right rocks. We see multiple structures with uraniferous potential already on there. And it's just a matter of us getting out there and doing some additional work that we can use to help us, to point us into the right direction and continue exploring on the Hook property. Hoping to get out there summer of 2021, which would be the most optimal time for us, as we want to see the rocks. We want to see if there's outcrops. We want to follow up these boulders. So we'll assess everything on the go. We'll assess everything between now and then, and really looking at the geophysics, especially what's been done in the past. Do we have to recover it with some modern geophysics? If we do, then that's another potential for bringing on another MT survey, which has been extremely helpful for us identifying the structures and just the depth of the structures, but also the style of the structures that we're observing over on Shadow. So why baseload energy? Well, I think we're targeting the right type of uranium deposit that can exist. These type of deposits have been discovered in the past. Uranium City is a key example of that. We're seeing Arrow. We're seeing the Griffin Zone, Denison's Griffin Zone. We're seeing Eagle Point. These basement hosted structures are not new, but exploring for them seems to be lost. We're reinvigorating this approach, and we're leading the charge on this with our Athabasca 2.0. We're taking different looks on how to look for basement-hosted uranium deposits. We're looking at a district-scale portfolio, and we will continue to assess and to add projects where we see merit in Baselode's growing portfolio. Management team and the board with a proven track record. Can't emphasize that enough, as we do have the right marriage of technical and financial expertise on the company. And with our combined efforts, this is a company that will move forward. We'll move forward quickly, and we will reward our shareholders. And we are well capitalized. We did that raised $3 million. We have $3.5 million in the bank. We're fully funded to get underway for our next exploration drill program, our first exploration drill program on Shadow. So it's very exciting times for us. We're in the right market space where we think the uranium market's just about poised to take off. And we think that we do have the right properties to make a discovery. So all the stars seem to be aligning perfectly for Baselode. And this is where we want to continue. We want to take our shareholders on this amazing journey and reward everyone in the end. So that's the introduction to Baselode. What I will be doing in the future, in the weeks to come, is I like to kind of educate people on the uranium space. So I will have some additional webinars that we will do through Baselode ourselves, just to highlight more of the shadow property, but also the hook property once we complete our assessment. So stay tuned to Baselode for some additional information coming down the pipelines.
That's great, James, and thank you for the sort of the intro. It's a great overview. Lots of questions coming in from the audience, and maybe we'll start with Shadow, because obviously that's the focus of the company. Basically, can you maybe go into a little bit of detail as to why you think Shadow fits that Athabasca 2.0? And then of those 3 targets that you've sort of outlined, which one excites you the most?
So I actually did a presentation a while ago it explains a lot of my thesis on there and what I see from a structural standpoint. I'm not just seeing the structure that is on the property itself, but it's even outside of the property. This is a massive scale structure that has all of the right ingredients. We're seeing the right dextral shear senses. We're interpreting these to be shear structures which move. We've actually seen that there is significant movement on the Athabasca Basin itself along the Virgin River shear zone, which indicates that these shear structures, well, the whole structures in general, were active during or after the sandstone had been deposited. So if you're looking for a structure before the sandstone, good chance you don't have the right fluid mix in there. But if you can find the structure after the sandstone was deposited, this is where you get your oxidized fluids, your reduced fluids, and you get that redox mix is what you need. So we've identified that on the Shadow property. We've identified that it's like a bottleneck type of feature where you can follow the Virgin River shear zone for quite a way, and it's very tight, very narrow. But once you get into the area of Shadow, that's when it explodes. That's where you get structures just overlapping each other, and within there is when you get those cross-cutting structures which allow for more dilation. You can have 2 structures like this, and your fluid's just going to migrate along there. As soon as you start adding structures coming in like this all the way through, that's far more fluid porosity. That's where you get your fluids. That's where you get your traps, and we've identified a number of those areas.
Right, and I guess that the conversation that you and I had previously about the recent MT survey, and that helped you identify some of those, bifurcating structures.
Yep, absolutely.
I think this is a good question from someone in the audience. It was about the comparison. Obviously, your experience, you worked on the Arrow discovery. So, they were comparing Arrow to maybe what you see at Shadow. So can you maybe talk about what some of the things you saw early on at Arrow that you're already seeing at Shadow that sort of have you excited?
Yep. And this is actually, I meant to answer the rest of your first question there about what targets we really like. Yeah. So each of the target areas that I identified, Arrow, Key, Eagle, Sioux, they all have analogs, almost identical analogs in the geophysical sense to those deposits themselves. So in the Arrow area that we see, that we're looking at, we've got these 2 conductors that are overlapping, and even the magnetics in the area seem to have the same bend as what we see at Arrow. We've identified that the Arrow structure is potentially, well, the Shadow structure, the Virgin River shear zone, is potentially the same structure as what we saw at Arrow. Now, I actually came across a presentation recently that it was something that I had overlooked, and this presentation came out before we had staked Shadow, but this is a next gen presentation, and they had even made a comparison from Arrow to the Virgin River shear zone. It's like, wow, well, it looks like we've got the same structural corridor going on, the same structural system. So this just adds more kindling to the fire that we're on the right track. That this is the right structural corridor we want to be on. The other area that we're really focused on, that myself am in love with, is that Key area. And that's just based on the geophysics. It looks identical to Key Lake in a lot of terms, just on the EM side of things, the magnetic side of things, the interpreted structures, and where we would expect to see alteration. And there's that area in itself also has the highest radiometric anomaly on the property. We have not flown our property with radiometrics. This was a government survey flown in 2010, but what they identified is the highest radiometric anomaly is within our Key Lake target area. So it's just building on these extra layers that keep saying, hey, look, I look like a great place for uranium to go. Come and drill me. So it's just waiting. It's just waiting. So 2021 looks like a great time to start pounding some drill holes in that area.
And I guess along those lines, when you start talking about layering on those things, you talk about the next step being gravity. What's that going to tell you about these target areas, and then to give you the confidence to go sort of start putting holes in it?
Gravity will help us define those structures, and it will really pick up on any alteration. When you think of a structure, again, you're looking at a structure like this, and the rocks up down here and up here, they're very competent, but everything in here is broken up. So you'll have porosity naturally introduced to this structural system. Gravity is mapping out density contrast. So when you have porosity, you're decreasing your density in the rocks. So gravity in itself will be able to pick up the structures. As soon as you start adding clay alteration to it, which is basically, I haven't seen a uranium deposit out there that in the Athabasca Basin area that does not have clay alteration. So when you start adding clay alteration to the mix, you're decreasing that density again, even more so. And it really stands out. It's basically a bullseye. And it hasn't just worked in the Athabasca Basin area. It's worked up in the Theolon as well, Andrew Lake itself. It's a brilliant bullseye in the gravity survey. I've used gravity plenty of times, and I can find clay alteration. Just because you find clay alteration doesn't necessarily mean that you will find uranium. But in the case of shadow, we firmly believe that we're in the right structural core. We firmly believe that the right fluids have moved out there. Now it's just a matter of finding where those fluids have precipitated out, and that's a clay alteration halo will stand out.
Right. And then that leads to, obviously, the next step was drilling, which you're hoping to start, I guess, early 2021. Maybe talk a little bit, a couple of questions on budget, what's the initial program, and then, obviously there's initial program, see what you learn, and then stepwise, sort of what do you have, what's the plan, and then, what do you have budget to sort of execute now currently in the Treasury? Yeah,
the plan is, again, to get that gravity done. So we've allocated about $250,000 towards that. It's a pretty big survey. We want to cover our four main target areas. We're hoping to get that going by the end of this month or even into December. And then following up on the gravity, we still have to get a road into the property. We have to put a camp in. They're not cheap. They're not expensive. So for us, this is more of an establishment year. It's an establishment program to be able to get everything ready for follow-up years. So that, again, the camp and everything there, you're looking at about another $250,000 to $500,000 on that. For the drilling wise, we're looking at about 5,000 meters, all given timing, given weather conditions. Assuming $300 a meter, which is very typical for the Athabasca, we're allotting about $1.5 million to a 5,000 meter drill program on shadow. So we're still nicely cashed up after we get all of these done. We'd still have about $1 million in the bank to keep the doors open and to keep our investigation going forward into Hook, but also into other areas that shadow will need a little bit more love, care, and attention towards. This summer, we're hoping to be able to get out there to Hook and to do some boots on the ground type of work out there, but also at shadow. There are outcrops out at shadow. The Government Geological Survey has been just north of where we're looking. So for us to get out there and be able to correlate some drill results with what they have, I think that would be pretty key as well. But also following up on some of these target areas with some more boots on the ground. Okay, all right. That's a pretty extensive. It's pretty good detail on the budget, and thank you for doing that. I guess the maybe moving to what is currently your secondary project. You never know what results will give you, but at early stage exploration. But taking a look at Hook. What are some of the things you talked a little bit about it in the presentation, but maybe some of the key things that jump out at you about Hook, that maybe some of the stuff you've learned in your compilation work that
that make it fit that Athabasca 2.0 model that you're looking for?
Basement boulders with uranium on them is definitely a key worth following up on. That's a hard thing to ignore.
Right.
And so we're trying to investigate the depth and the scope of how many boulders are actually discovered. We haven't found that report yet, but we will find that, obviously. I kid you not, there's at least 30 to 40 reports that we're kind of digging through. So this is not a small little undertaking. But,
and just for reference, I mean, uranium-containing boulders is not something new for discovering deposits in the Athabasca Basin. You've probably got a history with that. Maybe give everyone who maybe doesn't remember exactly how some of these things started. A couple of the deposits that were discovered that way.
Well, even Midwest Lake had uraniferous deposits on them. Yeah. MacArthur River, which is 300 meters, 500 meters down. Yeah. They had anomalous sandstone boulders. They were following up boulders with 10 ppm in the sandstone, and that helped lead to a discovery. Yeah. So it's these type of boulders, and most notably in the last 10 years, the Triple R deposit that Fission has. Yeah. That was a big boulder field discovery, and they did the simple thing. You just followed it up ice. Boom, there's your deposit. So we're looking at the same kind of idea. We're just, again, trying to gauge and scope on how many boulders we have, what are the grades, what are the sources. If we can identify some of the sources right off the bat, that just helps us going forward. I've already got an assumption of what they would be. So I think that will help us, and with some additional geophysical coverage on the area, then we'll be able to start correlating our own geophysics with interpreted geologies, which will help us lead to get to that discovery.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions, and I think it's a couple of questions as I've watched it go by and talked about discovery, and then moving from discovery to eventually potentially being a mine. It takes a long time for uranium deposits to develop, but maybe give our viewers a little bit of sense of from. And probably the most notable example is Arrow, which is on the verge, but is our most recent example is Arrow. But what does it take to get from drilling success to being ready to mine timeline wise?
It depends on where you are, but where we are with the Athabasca 2.0, we do feel that this is something that can move pretty quickly. I'm reminded of the Key Lake situation. Key Lake was a 5-year from discovery to mine. Right. So. That was back in the 70s. It's not now, but we feel that something else can move forward in less than a 10-year time frame. If you're looking at an open pit scenario, your drilling's much cheaper. You can get far more drilling when you're drilling shallower targets. You can define the area much quicker. So something like that, if we're looking for 200 meters as a deposit, let's say that's a 2-year time frame. Then you do all of your assessment work, your permitting studies, environmental permitting and issues like that. That takes a few years on top of that. But we feel that we could actually, if we make a discovery that's an open pitable discovery, we think that can move pretty quickly between 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and that's a good point on the Athabasca 2.0. Some of if you look at MacArthur River and Cigar Lake and those discoveries, a lot of those discoveries were made, and then it took a long time to figure out how to mine some of the most valuable rock in the world.
Absolutely.
The complications of freeze walls, and as you noted, they both flooded twice, trying to keep them open, it makes them longer to permit and develop and require a higher hurdle rate. It also depends on the uranium market as well as the pace of development. If you're in a situation where you have, I guess it's all capital dependent, right? And Next Gen and Arrow are the exception, not necessarily the rule. Is projects and things move ahead very quickly in a positive environment, which you and I agree we both see coming. And whereas unless you make that Arrow type discovery, which is has the potential to be outside the Kazakh ISR projects, the best mine in the world economics wise, and so it moves ahead regardless. And I think that's the part of the opportunity with that Athabasca 2.0 and looking for those basement deposits is that you can really lower the cost of operations when they go ahead.
Absolutely, and that's where we also feel that something like that we wouldn't have to bring forward ourselves. If we can make a proven open pitable deposit, I can almost guarantee you we'd have Orano knocking on the door, we'd have Cameco knocking on the door, we'd have Rio Tinto knocking on the door, we'd have Denison Mines knocking on the door. There would be a lot of suitors who would probably want this because they're all trying to develop their own deposits, but these are much deeper deposits to deal with. So why not shift focus and go for something that is far more lucrative and cost insensitive?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's part of the in uranium, quality will get built regardless, and I think that's one of the examples that we've seen with Arrow and to a lesser extent Fission. Those are rare things, and I think that's part of this is my transition to talk about the uranium market, but that's part of the thing that excites, uranium explorers are an interesting group, because not only do you get the beta of being involved in the uranium space and move with the uranium price, but you get the potential alpha of actually making a discovery and getting that move. And if you look at NextGen's chart, or if you look at even more recently IsoEnergy's chart, or uranium discoveries are rewarded. And you look at Fission's chart when they made their discoveries. They're rewarded by the market regardless of the condition of the actual uranium space. So I think that's from my perspective, that's a very interesting thing. And we've gotten a lot of questions about the uranium market from a variety of people. I think probably the key thing is on the uranium market, and I'll pose this in the form of a question to you, but I think the timeline you talked about from discovery, a typical deposit from discovery to being a mine, and there are uranium deposits out there that aren't mines, but that timeline is what makes this time in the uranium market so unique, is that there is a fundamental gap between what it costs to produce a pound of uranium and what people are paying for it. And the problem is the cost to produce is much higher than the cost to the people are paying for it. The $30 a pound that we see in the spot market, there's very few groups in the world that can produce below that level, and Kazatomprom is producing below that level, but they've already said that they don't want to be selling at that price because they're not supplying enough of the market to move it to keep the price down there. So if you want to talk a little bit about the fundamentals and what you see, and then I'll add in, because I'll add on to what you have to say.
Oh, agreed. I think a lot of the available market or freely floating uranium that's out there to be purchased, I think a lot of that has dwindled down. So that has put a crunch on the supply as it is. Yeah. And without the proper cash incentive, you can't bring on these mines. It's Cigar Lake, MacArthur River. Yeah, these are some of the mines that can produce under $30 a pound or close to it. Why? I agree with their sentiment. Why should they, when they can get higher prices? So that's a big thing going forward. How high, from what I remember, basically 10 years ago, is that the African operations needed $60 a pound to come online. Yeah. So you're not going to supply the world with just Kazakhstan or just Cigar or MacArthur. You do need a whole plethora of other commodity players or other uranium players. And Africa made up a lot of that back then. So did the States, Australia. But we've seen a lot of these mines shut down. So the supply is just not there. And it's simple economics, supply demand. Without the supply being reasonably achievable in a near term, when nobody's signing contracts, this is bound to take off. That spot price is bound to go through the roof. Once we see the contracts starting to be signed, and I think that's where we'll see some more motion. I just read something today about some of the uranium fabricators, some of the uranium fuel fabricators are now starting to come back online too. There's one group in the States. That's big news to me. That tells me that there is some action coming on, possibly on the contract side, that utilities do require some more. These contracts and fuel to be fabricated for them to keep going. I can't think of anybody who would want their lights to be turned off or have no power. I was freaking out when my internet crashed during this video, so I could only imagine what other people would be like if their nuclear utilities didn't have the fuel to keep running. We are seeing more builds across the world, so the demand is going to keep going up. We've got China's going pretty hard. I've seen in Biden's remarks that they're looking for advanced nuclear energy options, and I think they're going to be looking a lot more into small modular reactors, which personally I've been saying this for a number of years now, but SMRs, that's a nuclear renaissance. That's going to be huge. There's such a good market for those. I think that will really really bring nuclear back into the forefront of things.
Yeah, the small modular reactors, the simplification of nuclear energy is, you're not talking about billions of dollars to build. Yeah, the Chinese and the Russians, the two major Chinese uranium companies and the Russians are the biggest uranium or nuclear reactor builders in the world. And those groups are building out very aggressively in the developing world, and they're building out aggressively in a way where they're doing some security of supply agreements with those. And so, you're not just selling your nuclear reactor, you're selling a 60-year supply agreement. And neither Russia, Rosatom, or the Chinese groups have enough of their own production to supply those agreements. And so they are naturally hungry acquirers of uranium, and that's going to push the price higher. And I think to on the comment on supply and demand, I mean, COVID is one thing, and we've gotten a huge hit in the interim. But all that did was bring forward what we see. If you look at our most recent research and most other people's, and they look at it, the demand gap, the supply gap that we're going to see going out beyond sort of 2021, 2022 in uranium is pretty significant. And even, we assume that we use it for our modeling. We use a $50 or $60 uranium price, because that's we assume where it has to go for a lot of that gap to even get partially filled. And so, you're going to see the price move. And I think that in our most recent update, and I draw people's attention to this because I like the chart you had earlier pointing to 2005. This is where we are. UXC, who's a great big uranium consulting group, in their last report, they put out a comparison between 2005, 2006, and today, and what the differences were. And we put some of those details in our last uranium piece. But I think the big difference is the thing that's missing, and you alluded to it, was the long-term contracts. And there have been a lot of factors. The biggest group of uranium buyers in the world are U.S. utilities. And there's been a ton of uncertainty in the U.S. COVID is one that's been a challenge, but the Russia suspension agreement, which is now settled, the Section 232 challenge that is now settled, and now what you're seeing, and it's very bipartisan, fortunately for the uranium, or for the nuclear industry, is that there's a real push in the U.S. to go nuclear as a green solution. So all those things should allow these U.S. utilities to get back to the market and buy. And if I look out longer term, the supply gap is in the developing world where the Russians and the Chinese are building. In the interim, it's in the U.S. Where they have a big supply gap coming 2021 and 2022. It takes 2 years for a new long-term contract to land material, give or take, at your doorstep if you're a utility. And so they've got to start contracting now. And with things starting to clear out of the way, we should see that. Both Kazatomprom reported and Cameco reported last week, and both seem to indicate that they were seeing an uptick in conversations about long-term agreements. And that's the spot market is interesting. It's stocks trade around it and it's fun. But the real key is the long-term, because that's what gets mines built. That's what drives the market. And if we start to see long-term contracts, what we saw in 2007 is on the horizon. So that's kind of our view on the uranium market. We agree, which is good.
Absolutely.
And we've got only about 5 minutes left, and I want to take it back. There was a couple of questions on Baselode itself, so we'll go to those. Secondly, first, there's a couple of questions. Are you guys looking at a U.S. listing, and would you consider one, whether it's an OTCQB or something like that?
We're currently looking at listing OTCQB.
Okay, good. That was one of the questions, and I think that's a good step. And then I guess the second is on the liquidity, about the $3.5 million that you have. Where does that get you to next year with the programs that you have at a high level? We talked a little bit in detail about the use of proceeds, but at a high level, where does that sort of get you to, or what do you need?
That basically pulls us. That gets us through 12 months.
Okay.
With being very cash sensitive into what we want to do, we're not going to go nuts with doing too many things outside what we need to get done, and it gets us to our drill program, which I'm hoping we can be successful right off the bat, because that's a huge game changer in itself. But that's the real big push. That's where we're trying to put more money into the ground rather than doing anything else.
Yeah.
So that's
That's the important thing. So with that, there is a question, and it's probably a little more general, and I'll ask it about the potential for solution mining. Obviously, that's something you're familiar with the basin. It's something Denison is looking at, or is pursuing pretty actively. Do you think that's something that could work in the basin, outside of probably what is maybe a select circumstance with Denison? And is it something that, as you look at sort of Athabasca 2.0 and outside the basin, is there an opportunity for?
Oh, I'd like to make a discovery first to be able to look down that road. So
yeah. That is fair.
We would keep all cards open.
I think that's a good. I mean, that's there's a few steps to get through before you look at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we still got to get permits
to drill the first holes.
Yep.
And then just one last question. And this came from a member of the audience. Obviously, while you're president CEO of Baselode, it's not the only hat that you wear. What about the time split between Baselode and your role at Appia?
Right now, Baselode's taking up more of my time, obviously, because it's something we have to get off the ground. So I'm putting a lot of time and effort into that, rightfully so. I think this has a lot of rewards to it. Appia, we've been successful in raising money there. So now it's just a matter of just waiting to when we can do our next field season there and start pushing that envelope. But that's, right now, Baselode is my main focus.
Okay. All right. And then, so with that, maybe just give us a couple of reasons why Baselode Energy, and we'll go from, and we'll wrap it up there.
Yep. So why Baselode Energy? We've got a proven technical team who have made discoveries and quite a bit of uranium. We know the uranium space. We know the uranium market, and we feel the uranium market's about to turn for benefit of all shareholders and anybody invested in the uranium space. We also feel that we do have the right projects that can make a discovery, and that's, to me, what I think is very important. This is one of these areas that, especially with Shadow, it screams at me. It just keeps talking to me. So I keep answering it back, and I want to answer back with the drill hole.
And we're looking forward to those gravity results, and then and drilling in early 2021 from Baselode. So with that, I'd like to thank you, James, for being on today. I'd like to thank everyone who attended. It's great to have such have an audience to talk to, not just the two of us talking to each other.
Yeah.
And as a reminder, here at Red Club, we got a full slate of webinars ongoing. Check out our news and media page to see them and to see the replay of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How do I get off this time?